You're nothing but a good old boy racist hiding behind folksy sayings. Ilhan Omar's voice cut through the Senate hearing room like a machete through sugarcane. She stood at the witness table. Crimson suit, blazing hijab, perfectly arranged finger pointed at Senator John Kennedy like a weapon. Failed Democrat, fake Republican Trump bootlicker who thinks he's Mark Twain. She was just warming up her supporters already chanting behind her. Racist, bigot, Confederate. Kennedy didn't even flinch. The Louisiana senator just sat there slowly polishing his glasses like he was watching paint dry on a humid day. When Omar finally paused for breath, he drawled, "Well, bless your heart, Congresswoman, you're about as sharp as a bowling ball today." Then he reached under the table and pulled out 5 manila folders marked with FBI evidence seals. "Unlike your tweets that disappear faster than crawfish at a church boil," Kennedy said, arranging the folders with deliberate precision. "What I'm fixing to show you today has a certain permanence to it." Omar's face shifted. This wasn't the angry reaction she'd expected. Kennedy tapped the first folder. "Shall we begin with a little story about family values? Because I do believe that's where your troubles began." The color drained from Omar's face. She knew exactly what Kennedy meant by family values. Her lawyer grabbed her arm, whispering urgently, but she shook him off. "Whatever fabricated evidence you think you have." Fabricated. Kennedy's eyebrows rose above his wire-rimmed glasses. "Ma'am, DNA don't lie. But let me tell you this story proper from the beginning." The first folder opened like Pandora's box. If Pandora had been a meticulous federal investigator with a penchant for documentation. Kennedy's weathered fingers that had turned pages of law books at Oxford and legal briefs in Baton Rouge courtrooms extracted the first document with deliberate care. The paper itself seemed to carry weight beyond its physical properties, as if the truth inscribed upon it had mass and consequence. "Now, Congresswoman," Kennedy began his voice, taking on the storytelling cadence that had made him legendary in Louisiana courtrooms, where juries would lean forward, despite themselves drawn into narratives that transformed complex legal matters into human dramas they could understand. "Let me tell you a story about family values. It's a tale that starts in Somalia, winds through Minnesota, and ends up in a federal courthouse. It's got more twists than a back-count road after a hurricane." He held up the first document, angling it so the cameras could capture the official seals and stamps that marked it as authenticated evidence. "This here's an immigration document from 2009. Now, I'm not one to pry into family matters. My mama raised me better than that. But when family matters become federal matters, well, that's when folks like me have to pay attention." Omar's composure, which had been rock solid during her initial attack, began to show the first hairline cracks. Her eyes darted to her lawyer, then to her staff, seeking some signal, some indication of how much Kennedy actually knew. The folder before him was thick. Too thick for comfort. "See, in Louisiana, we got all kinds of family arrangements." Kennedy continued warming to his theme. "We got cousins who marry cousins. Though we try to discourage that these days. We got folks who call everybody cousin, whether they're related or not. And we got family trees that look more like family bushes. But one thing we don't have, ma'am, is folks marrying their brothers and calling it something else. That's about as popular as a tornado in a trailer park." He produced another document, this one bearing the distinctive formatting of a marriage certificate. "Now, this here says, you married a gentleman named Ahmed Nur Said Elmi in 2009. Nice enough name. Problem is these other documents." He fanned out several more papers like a poker hand seemed to suggest that Mr. Elmi wasn't just your husband. "School records from North Dakota State University list him as your brother. Immigration papers from 1995 show him entering the country as your sibling. Even got the same daddy listed, Nord Elmi." The hearing room had gone completely silent. Even the reporters, usually chattering into phones or typing furiously, sat frozen, recognizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Kennedy had transformed from the folksy senator they thought they knew into something far more dangerous. A prosecutor with evidence and the patience to deploy it devastatingly. "Now I know what you're thinking," Kennedy said, anticipating Omar's defense before she could voice it. "You're thinking this is just confusion. Similar names, bureaucratic mix-ups, and heaven knows government paperwork gets fouled up more often than a cheap computer. But then we got this." He produced a sealed evidence bag containing what appeared to be a coffee cup. MI5. That's British intelligence for folks who don't watch spy movies. They're real helpful when it comes to international investigations. This coffee cup came from a London cafe where Mr. Elmi was photographed in 2016. Funny thing about DNA, Congresswoman. It don't lie, don't forget, and don't care about your politics. Lab results show a 99-97% probability of sibling relationship between the DNA on this cup and samples we obtained from your previous campaign events. You know those meet and greets where you shake hands and kiss babies and leave genetic material on everything you touch? This is preposterous. Omar finally found her voice, though it lacked the commanding tone of her earlier attacks. This is a fabricated, ma'am. Kennedy interrupted gently like a grandfather correcting a child's fib. I'm not near done yet. See, marriage fraud by itself is serious enough. Carries up to 5 years in federal prison and a $250,000 fine. But it's what you did with this marriage that really catches the attention. He pulled out financial records, each one bearing the telltale signs of forensic accounting analysis. Highlighted sections, marginal notes in different colored inks, cross-references to other documents. Mr. Elmi, your brother husband, he received $50 in federal student aid while married to you. Aid he wouldn't have qualified for as a foreign student, but did qualify for as the spouse of an American citizen. That's theft of government funds. Ma'am, that's fraud. That's a federal offense with its own set of penalties. A stirring in the gallery drew attention to a woman in her 30s. Professionally dressed, but clearly uncomfortable with the spotlight. She stood slowly as if fighting against invisible weights. My name is Aisha Muhammad, she said, her voice carrying the accent of Somalia softened by years in America. I worked for Congresswoman Omar's campaign in 2018. I need to speak. Security moved toward her, but Kennedy raised a hand. Let her talk. This is America. We let people speak their truth. She told us to never mention Ahmed was her brother. Aisha continued, her voice gaining strength. She said it was a lie from her enemies. But I saw the emails. I heard the phone calls. She would speak to him in Somali, call him brother, then switch to English and call him husband when others were around. You're being paid, Omar shouted, standing abruptly. This is all lies. Manufactured evidence. Actually, Kennedy said, producing another document. Ms. Muhammad came forward 6 months ago. No payment, no promises, just a conscience that couldn't stay quiet anymore. She provided us with these. He laid out a series of text messages blown up large enough for the gallery to read. Don't worry, brother. The papers say husband now. The lawyer fixed everything. We're legal on paper. Delete these messages after you read. You know what we call it in Louisiana when you can't unscramble eggs? Kennedy asked, his voice taking on an edge despite maintaining its conversational tone. We call it consequences. And ma'am, you got yourself a whole henhouse worth of scrambled eggs here. But Kennedy wasn't finished. Like a storyteller who knows the power of pacing, he reached deeper into the folder, extracting documents that bore the seals of multiple federal agencies. Now, the immigration fraud, that's bad enough. But then there's the perjury. See, when you filed for divorce from Mr. Elmi in 2017, you swore under oath that you'd had no contact with him since 2011. Funny thing about social media, Congresswoman, it remembers everything. He produced printed screenshots, each one dated and authenticated. Here's you and Mr. Elmi at a family gathering in 2013. Here's a happy birthday message you posted on his Facebook wall in 2014. Here's a photo from Instagram. Yours, not his, shown Thanksgiving dinner 2015 with someone who looks remarkably like your brother husband carving the turkey. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut sometimes. Kennedy mused, allowing himself a small smile. And we found a whole forest of them. Each one of these lies under oath is a separate count of perjury. Each one carries its own penalties. We're talking about decades in prison. Ma'am, decades. The weight of evidence was becoming crushing. Omar's supporters in the gallery had grown quiet, some already slipping toward the exits, their chants forgotten, their signs lowered. The revolution they had come to witness was turning into something else entirely, a reckoning. But here's what really chaps my hide, Kennedy said, his voice taking on the first hint of genuine anger. It's not just the lies. It's not just the fraud. It's what you did to the good people who believed in you. The Somali community in Minnesota, hardworking folks who came here the right way, Who followed the rules? Who built businesses and raised families and became Americans in every sense that matters? You've made their lives harder. Every time one of them applies for anything. Now folks wonder, is this another scam? Is this another Omar situation? He closed the first folder with a sound like a gavel falling. Immigration fraud, wire fraud, federal student aid fraud, perjury, multiple counts of each, and we're just getting started. As my grandpappy used to say, when you're in a hole, stop digging. But you, ma'am, you brought an excavator. Kennedy reached for the second folder, then paused, looking directly at Omar with something that might have been pity. You want to take a break? Congresswoman, maybe consult with your lawyer because this next part, well, let's just say it involves someone you supposedly love. And it ain't pretty. In Louisiana, we believe in giving folks a chance to compose themselves before the really hard truths come out. But Omar, despite the visible trembling in her hands, despite the sweat beading on her forehead beneath her hijab, shook her head. Pride perhaps, or maybe just the recognition that stopping now would only make the inevitable resumption worse. All right, then, Kennedy said, opening the second folder. Let's talk about mixed in business with pleasure because what you and Mr. Monet did, well, it makes a Louisiana swamp look crystal clear by comparison. The second folder opened with the whisper of paper against paper, a sound that somehow carried in the hushed hearing room like the first rumble of distant thunder. Kennedy's handling of the documents continued to be methodical, almost reverential, as if he understood that each page represented not just evidence, but the betrayal of public trust on a scale that would reverberate through political history. Now, speaking of marriages, Kennedy began, his voice carrying that deceptive softness that Louisiana lawyers learned to deploy like a concealed weapon. Let's talk about mixing business with pleasure. It's like bourbon and bad decisions. They tend to go together. But the hangover is always worse than you expect. He extracted a photograph first, placing it where the cameras could capture it clearly. The image showed Omar and Tim Manette at what appeared to be a campaign event, their body language suggesting an intimacy that went beyond professional collaboration. Tim Manette, political consultant, married man. Well, he was when this all started. Also, coincidentally, the recipient of nearly $3 million from your campaign over 4 years. That's a lot of consulting. Ma'am, that's more consulting than a psychiatrist's convention. The timeline Kennedy began to construct was devastating in its clarity. Each document built upon the last, creating a narrative that transformed what might have been dismissed as gossip into evidence of systematic fraud. 2018. He read from a Federal Election Commission filing street group. That's Mr. Monet's company receives its first payment from Omar for Congress. $62.500 for strategic communications. Now, that sounds reasonable enough. Campaigns need strategy, like Louisiana needs levees. But here's where it gets interesting. He produced internal emails obtained through what must have been an extensive investigation. These are from your campaign staff, Congresswoman, and I got to tell you, your people were about as happy as a mosquito in a nudist colony. Listen to this one. She's using campaign funds to pay her boyfriend. This is illegal, but she doesn't care. We're all going to end up in federal prison. Omar's lawyer leaned in urgently, whispering what were undoubtedly pleased for her to invoke the Fifth Amendment to stop the bleeding before it became a hemorrhage. But Omar, whether from hubris or the paralysis that comes from watching one's carefully constructed world collapse, remained silent. Now affairs happen. Kennedy continued adopting the tone of a worldly man who had seen human frailty in all its forms. Even in the Senate, though we try to keep it quieter than a church mouse. But what you did, ma'am, wasn't just betraying marriage vows. You betrayed every small dollar donor who sent you $25 thinking it would help change the world. The financial records he displayed next had been annotated by forensic accountants. Their findings highlighted in different colors like a rainbow of corruption. 2019 E Street Group receives $523. 2020 $878.000. 2021 $654.000. 2022 $832.000. Total $2.9 million. That's enough money to buy every person in my hometown of Zachary a pretty nice Christmas present. But here's the thing that really frosts my cookies, Kennedy said, producing a thick folder marked work product analysis. He made a show of flipping through it page after page. Our investigators spent 6 months looking for evidence of actual work performed for all this money. You know what we found? I'll show you. He held up the folder and dramatically turned it upside down. Nothing fell out. The gesture was theatrical but effective. Empty as a politician's promise. No strategic plans. No communication strategies. No digital analytics. No focus group reports. Nothing but invoices and cancelled checks. A commotion in the gallery drew attention to a man in his 40s. Well-dressed but clearly agitated. He stood abruptly, ignoring the security personnel who moved toward him. "I need to speak," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm David Chen, former finance director for the Omar campaign. I can't stay silent anymore." Kennedy nodded to security to let him continue, recognizing the value of spontaneous testimony in breaking down a defendant's defenses. "Tell us what you know." "Son, she made us structure the payments to stay under reporting thresholds." Chen said, the words tumbling out as if a dam had broken. "Multiple invoices for $999 instead of one for $50. Different service descriptions for the same non-existent work." She said everyone did it. That this was how the game was played. "That's a lie." Omar finally exploded, but her protest sounded hollow. The desperate denial of someone caught red-handed. "I have recordings." Chen continued, pulling out a phone. "She didn't know I was documenting everything for my own protection." Kennedy gestured for him to continue and Chen pressed play. Omar's voice filled the hearing room, clear and damning. "Tim needs another $50 for the trip to California. Call it debate preparation." "No. Wait. Make it media training. We used debate prep last month." Another recording. "If anyone asks about the payments, you know nothing. Tim is just a vendor like any other. The fact that I'm sleeping with him is irrelevant. The work is real, even if the invoices are creative." "Creative?" Kennedy mused, savoring the word like a sommelier. Evaluating a particularly pretentious wine. "In Louisiana, we got another word for creative invoicing. We call it fraud. And ma'am, you were more creative than a jazz musician on Bourbon Street. But the financial crimes were just the appetizer." Kennedy produced bank records that showed the full scope of the scheme. "Here's where it gets really interesting. The money goes from your campaign to East Street Group. From there, it takes a little journey. Like a tourist in New Orleans. It visits all sorts of interesting places." He traced the path with his finger on a flowchart that looked like a subway map designed by someone with criminal intent. E Street Group to TJM Consulting. That's another Manet company. From there to Progressive Strategies LLC. Guess who owns that? Then to personal accounts, personal credit cards, personal purchases. The receipts he produced next painted a picture of grotesque excess funded by campaign donors. $15 at Hermes for handbags. $30 at Tiffany for jewelry. $175 down payment on a beach house in Florida. All paid for with money that was supposed to elect you to Congress. Not fund your lifestyle like some kind of political Kardashian. But wait, Kennedy said, adopting the tone of a late-night infomercial host. There's more. Mr. Manette, it turns out, has been real helpful to our investigation. See, when faced with the choice between loyalty to you and 25 years in federal prison, he chose what's behind door number 3. An immunity deal. He produced a document bearing the seal of the Department of Justice. Mr. Manet's cooperation agreement in exchange for full testimony about your financial crimes. He gets to serve his time in a minimum security facility. Probably learn some nice trades. Maybe write a book. You know what? He told us. Kennedy read from Manette's deposition, his voice taking on the flat effect of legal testimony. She taught me how everyone does it. She said campaign finance laws were suggestions, not rules. She said the FEC was toothless. That they'd never catch us if we were smart about it. She said the key was to make everything look legitimate on paper. Everyone does it, Kennedy repeated, shaking his head with theatrical sadness. You know, in Louisiana, my mama had a saying. If everyone jumped off a bridge, would you jump, too? Apparently. Your answer was, yes, ma'am, and I'd charge the campaign for the bungee cord. The evidence continued to mount. Text messages between Omar and Manet planning their fraud. Emails to campaign staff instructing them on how to structure illegal payments. Even recordings from campaign meetings where Omar explicitly discussed hiding personal expenses as campaign costs. Labor Day weekend 2021. Kennedy read from a credit card statement. Luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas. $12 for 5 nights charged to the campaign as a strategic planning retreat. Only attendees. You and Mr. Manet. Must have been some real intense planning. The kind that requires champagne room service and couples massages. By now Omar had slumped in her chair. The fight draining from her like air from a punctured balloon. Her supporters in the gallery had thinned considerably with only the most diehard remaining. And even they looked shaken by the relentless presentation of evidence. 23 counts of FEC violations. Kennedy summarized. 8 counts of wire fraud. 12 counts of money laundering. And that's just federal. The state of Minnesota has their own charges waiting: fraud, conspiracy, theft by deception. You're looking at more charges than a rhino in a china shop. He closed the second folder with deliberate finality. You know, my grandpappy used to say, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. Well, ma'am, you put a consultant label on theft, a business expense tag on personal shopping, and a strategic planning name on romantic getaways. But at the end of the day, it's all just lipstick, and we all know what's underneath. Kennedy reached for the third folder, pausing as he had before. This next part involves foreign money. Congresswoman, foreign influence, the kind of thing that makes campaign finance fraud look like jaywalking. You sure you don't want to consult with counsel? Maybe make some phone calls, because once I open this folder, there's no putting this particular genie back in the bottle. But Omar, perhaps recognizing that her fate was already sealed, perhaps clinging to some desperate hope that she could still talk her way out of this, shook her head. Her hijab had shifted slightly. A strand of hair visible. The kind of imperfection that her image consultants would have rushed to fix, but now seemed emblematic of her entire unraveling. All right, then, Kennedy said, opening the third folder. Let's talk about Qatar, because what you did for them makes Benedict Arnold look like a patriot. And that's not the kind of comparison anyone wants on their resume. The third folder bore classification markings that made several reporters in the gallery lean forward. Recognizing the significance of what was about to be revealed, Kennedy handled these documents with even greater care than the previous ones. Aware that he was about to expose intelligence matters that rarely saw the light of public disclosure. Now this here's thicker than gumbo on a cold day. Kennedy began his folksy metaphor, belying the gravity of what he was about to reveal. When I was a young man, my daddy told me that money talks. What he didn't tell me was that sometimes it speaks with a foreign accent. And when it does, folks need to pay real close attention to what it's saying. He produced a timeline that looked like the work of intelligence analysts, which as would soon become clear, it was. Let's start with a little geography lesson. Qatar, little bitty country smaller than Connecticut, but with more natural gas than a bean-eating contest, also happens to have more money than they know what to do with. So, they go shopping, not for handbags or jewelry. Ma'am, they shop for influence. And in 2017, they went to market right here in America. The first photograph he displayed showed Omar at what appeared to be an elegant dinner party. January 2017, Doha, Qatar. You were there for a conference on democracy and human rights. Funny thing about that conference, it was invitation only. And the invitation list read like a who's who of folks who'd later vote against sanctions on Qatar. Coincidence? Well, as we say in Louisiana, that dog won't hunt. He began laying out financial documents with the methodical precision of someone building a house of cards if each card was a federal felony. Now, tracking foreign money is like following a snake through tall grass. You know it's there, but you got to be patient to see the whole thing. Lucky for us, the NSA and Treasury Department, they're real patient folks. The flowchart he displayed next required a moment for viewers to comprehend its complexity. Money moved from the Qatar Foundation, ostensibly a charitable organization, through a labyrinthine network of intermediaries. Qatar Foundation to International Democracy Initiative in Cyprus. From there to American Muslims for Progress in Delaware. Then to Partnership for Change PAC. Finally to Omar for Congress. Each step designed to obscure the origin, like laundering dirty clothes. Except these clothes were made of money and the dirt was foreign influence. Total amount traced $1.8 million over 5 years. Kennedy stated the number hanging in the air like an accusation. Now that's enough to buy a lot of democracy. Or as it turns out, to rent a congresswoman. He produced transcripts next heavily redacted, but with enough visible to be damning. These are NSA intercepts. And before you start hollering about privacy, these were obtained through proper FISA warrants targeting Qatari intelligence operations. You just happened to get caught in the net like a catfish at a fish fry. He began reading, his voice taking on the flat tone of someone delivering evidence rather than telling a story. Qatari official. Our investment in Sister Omar continues to pay dividends. Handler. She delivered 3 votes this month as requested. Official, increase her funding. She's worth 10 lobbyists. Worth 10 lobbyists. Kennedy repeated, looking at Omar with something between disgust and pity. That's what you became, ma'am. A bargain basement lobbyist for a foreign power. Except lobbyists have to register. You just took the money and pretended you were voting your conscience. But the financial trail was just the beginning. Kennedy produced photographs from multiple international trips. You sure did travel a lot for someone who claims to represent Minneapolis. Doha 5 times. Istanbul 6 times. Even a few trips to Tehran that you forgot to mention on your disclosure forms. Funny how those memory lapses always seem to involve places that don't much care for America. The video he played next had clearly been obtained through intelligence channels. The quality was remarkable hidden camera footage from what appeared to be a private dinner in a Qatari palace. Omar sat at an ornate table surrounded by men in traditional Qatari dress and expensive Western suits. Listen to yourself, Kennedy said as Omar's voice filled the hearing room. On screen, she was animated, gesturing with her hands as she spoke. The Israeli lobby thinks they own Congress. They're about to learn different. Give me 2 years and I'll have enough allies to block any pro-Israel legislation. The squad is just the beginning. We're building a movement and Qatar's investment will pay off a hundredfold. Investment, Kennedy emphasized, not donation, not contribution. Investment like you were a stock to be bought and sold. And lordy did they get their money's worth. He produced voting records next. Each one annotated to show correlation with Qatari interests. 17 separate votes where you aligned with Qatar's position. 5 amendments you introduced that directly benefited their economy. 3 resolutions condemning their enemies that you sponsored. If this was a coincidence, it's the kind that would make a statistician quit his job and take up farming. But here's where it gets really interesting. Kennedy continued producing a document marked with CIA authentication. Our friends at Langley have been watching Qatar's influence operations for years. They even gave your file a codename. Desert Rose. Romantic, ain't it? Though I suspect federal prison is less romantic than a desert. And he read from the CIA assessment. Subject Omar has demonstrated consistent alignment with Qatari strategic objectives. Analysis indicates conscious cooperation rather than coincidental agreement. Probability of formal arrangement 87%. Threat to U.S. interests significant 87%. Kennedy mused. That's about as certain as the CIA gets without having video of you signing a contract. Oh, wait, he added with theatrical timing. We do have video. The next footage was grainier. Clearly taken from a security camera. It showed Omar in what appeared to be a parking garage meeting with a man in a suit. The exchange was brief. An envelope passed from his hands to hers. That's Colonel Hassan al-Rashid, Qatari intelligence. Kennedy explained. That envelope contained $50 in cash and instructions for upcoming votes. We know because we arrested the good colonel last year and he's been singing like a canary at a music festival. Turns out facing federal terrorism charges makes folks real talkative. The evidence continued to pile up like sediment in the Mississippi Delta. Bank records showing deposits that coincided with key votes. Encrypted communications decoded by the NSA. Even a recorded phone call where Omar explicitly promised to deliver the votes Qatar needs. You know what we call someone who takes money from a foreign power to influence American policy? Kennedy asked, his voice hardening despite maintaining its conversational tone. We call them a foreign agent. And when they don't register as one, we call them a criminal. And when that foreign power is working against American interests, well, some folks might use an even stronger word that starts with T and rhymes with reason. A disturbance in the gallery drew attention to a middle-aged man in an expensive suit. He stood slowly, his bearing suggesting government service despite his civilian clothes. My name is Michael Harrison. I was CIA's station chief in Doha from 2016 to 2020. I've been authorized to speak about certain aspects of our operations. The hearing room became even quieter if such a thing was possible. It was almost unheard of for intelligence officials to testify in public hearings. Kennedy nodded for him to continue. We documented over 30 meetings between Congresswoman Omar and Qatari intelligence operatives. Harrison stated, his voice carrying the flat effect of someone trained to deliver facts without emotion. She was considered their most valuable asset in Congress. Her code name in their files was Sister Star. They had a 5-year plan to use her influence to fundamentally shift American Middle East policy. Sister Star, Kennedy repeated. Well, ain't that sweet? Like a Hollywood agent naming their client. Except instead of making movies, you were making policy for a foreign power. He returned to his documents, producing cryptocurrency records that showed an even more modern form of corruption. But cash in parking garages is so old-fashioned. Y'all got creative with Bitcoin. $500,000 traced through blockchain analysis. The beautiful thing about cryptocurrency, Congresswoman, is that it leaves a permanent record. Every transaction, every wallet, every transfer. It's like writing your crimes in stone. This is manufactured evidence. Omar finally protested, though her voice lacked its earlier fire. This is Islamophobia. You're targeting me because I'm Muslim. No, ma'am, Kennedy replied with the patience of someone who had anticipated this defense. We're targeting you because you're a criminal. Your religion is between you and your maker. Your crimes are between you and the United States government. And right now, the United States government has some serious issues with your behavior. He produced one final document from the Qatar folder. A handwritten note in Arabic with an English translation. This was found in your Home Office safe. A thank you note from the Qatari foreign minister. Let me read the translation. Dear Sister Omar, your steadfast support for our cause has been invaluable. Your courage in standing against the Zionist lobby and their Saudi puppets will be remembered by history. Continue your blessed work. Paradise awaits the faithful. Paradise awaits the faithful. Kennedy repeated, looking at Omar with genuine bewilderment. Did you really think selling out your country was some kind of religious duty? Did you think taking foreign money to undermine American interests was going to get you into heaven? Because I got to tell you, ma'am, the only place this is getting you is federal prison. And I hear their prayer rooms are a lot less comfortable than what you're used to. He closed the folder slowly, as if reluctant to end this particular chapter. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act violations. Operating as an unregistered foreign agent. Money laundering. Conspiracy against the United States. And we haven't even gotten to the Somalia connections yet. You're stacking up federal charges like cordwood before a cold winter. The impact on the hearing room was palpable. Even Omar's most ardent supporters seemed stunned by the scope of foreign influence revealed. Several Qatar flags that had been visible in the crowd had mysteriously disappeared. Their bearers apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. You know, Kennedy mused, reaching for the fourth folder in Louisiana. We say you're either at the table or on the menu. You thought you were at Qatar's table. But it turns out you were the main course. And they've been feeding on American interests through you for years. And he paused before opening the next folder, studying Omar with the expression of a doctor about to deliver a terminal diagnosis. This next part is about your speech to the Somali community. The one where you said some things in Somali that you probably didn't think would get translated. Well, surprise, surprise. The FBI has some real good translators. You ready to hear what you really said that day? Because your constituents back in Minneapolis. They deserve to know who you really serve. The fourth folder opened with the solemnity of a sealed indictment being revealed. Kennedy's weathered hands extracted documents that bore the authentication stamps of multiple federal agencies. FBI, DHS, State Department, a constellation of bureaucratic authority that spoke to the seriousness of what was about to be disclosed. Now I speak slower than molasses. In January, Kennedy began his self-deprecating humor, a thin veneer over the prosecutorial steel beneath. But even I can understand Somali when it's translated by folks who know what they're doing. And Lord have mercy, Congresswoman, what you said when you thought only your people were listening. Well, it's about as American as a French kiss at a family reunion. The video he produced had been enhanced by FBI technicians. The audio cleaned up to crystalline clarity. The date stamp showed February 2024. The location, a community center in Minneapolis, draped with both American and Somali flags. a visual irony that would soon become apparent. Let me set the scene. Kennedy continued, adopting his storyteller's cadence. Community celebration. Somali Heritage Night. You're the guest of honor. The success story. The one who made it big in American politics. And you decided to give them a speech they'd never forget. Problem is, you gave us one, too. On the screen, Omar appeared resplendent in traditional Somali dress. Her bearing regal as she addressed a packed auditorium. The crowd's energy was palpable. Their excitement at seeing one of their own in such a position of power. Kennedy let the video play, Omar's voice filling the hearing room as she spoke in rapid Somali. Now for those who don't speak the language, Kennedy said, producing a transcript with 3 different certified translations. Let me share what our translators. And we had 3 different ones to make sure we got it right. Tell us, you said. He began reading his Louisiana drawl, transforming the translated words into something even more jarring. My brothers and sisters, they think because we carry American passports, we have forgotten who we are. They think we have become like them. But Somalia runs in our blood. Somalia is in our hearts. We are Somali first always. The crowd in the video erupted in cheers, chanting, Somalia, Somalia, with a fervor that seemed to electrify Omar, pushing her to even greater rhetorical heights. Kennedy continued reading, I went to Washington for you. Not for Minnesota, not for America, for you. Every vote I take, I ask myself, is this good for Somalia? Every policy I support, I think, will this help our people back home? America is just our playground. Somalia is our heart. Playground, Kennedy repeated, looking at Omar with undisguised contempt. The United States of America. The country that gave you refuge. That gave you citizenship. That gave you the privilege of serving in its Congress. You called it a playground. Like it's some kind of jungle gym for your real interests. But the speech was just the beginning. Kennedy produced documents that painted a picture of systematic exploitation of congressional power for foreign purposes. These are wire transfer records showing money flowing from your campaign and associated organizations to Somalia. $3.20 $2 million over 5 years. The organizations claimed to be charities. Building schools, you said, helping orphans, feeding the hungry. Noble goals if they were true. He produced intelligence reports bearing the seals of multiple agencies. Treasury Department tracked the money. You know where it went? Not to schools, not to orphans, not to the hungry. It went to regional power brokers affiliated with Al-Shabaab. You were funding terrorism with campaign dollars. Congresswoman, American money donated by American citizens used to fund groups that want to kill Americans. The photographs he displayed next drew gasps from the gallery. Children, some no older than 8 or 9, holding automatic weapons, standing in formation in what appeared to be a training camp. A banner in the background read in Somali, "Thanks to Sister Ilhan for her support." These children, Kennedy said, his voice carrying genuine emotion now. They should be in school. They should be playing soccer. Instead, they're being trained as child soldiers with money you sent. How do you sleep at night, knowing that a commotion in the gallery drew attention to a group of Somali Americans who had been sitting together? An elderly man stood, his dignity evident despite his obvious distress. He spoke with accented but clear English. My name is Abdullahi Hassan. I came to America 30 years ago with nothing. America gave me everything. Safety, opportunity, freedom. His voice cracked with emotion. He pointed at Omar with a trembling finger. She told us, America owes us everything. She said, take welfare. It's our right. Take benefits. It's compensation for colonialism. She said, use their system against them. Thank you for your courage, Mr. Hassan. Kennedy said gently, please continue. She held workshops. Hassan continued, his voice growing stronger. Teaching people how to lie on asylum applications. How to claim persecution that never happened. How to get benefits while working under the table. I complained. Said this was wrong. She said I was a traitor to my people. Said I had forgotten who I was. Kennedy returned to his documents, producing evidence that corroborated Hassan's testimony. Workshop materials from your office. Know Your Rights seminars. You called them, but look at what you were really teaching. He displayed photographed pages from the workshop handouts. How to claim religious persecution when none existed. Template stories about fleeing Al-Shabaab when you actually supported them. Instructions on obtaining multiple benefits using variations of names. This wasn't constituent service. Congresswoman, this was a criminal enterprise using your congressional office as headquarters. But wait, Kennedy said, adopting the tone of a television pitchman again. There's more. These are text messages between you and known Somali government officials. You were sharing classified briefing information, warning about ICE operations, coordinating what you called community resistance. But what federal law calls obstruction of justice. He read from the messages. Immigration raid planned for Tuesday. Warn everyone. FBI investigating wire transfers use alternative methods. They're watching the mosques meet elsewhere. You turned your congressional office into an intelligence operation for a foreign country. Kennedy stated flatly. You made every Somali American who follows the law look suspicious. You confirmed every negative stereotype. You made their lives harder, not easier. More Somali Americans in the gallery began standing, apparently emboldened by Hassan's example. A young woman in medical scrubs spoke next. I'm Dr. Amina Jama. I came here as a refugee child. I worked hard, became a doctor. Now, because of her patience, ask if I'm really here to help or if I have another agenda. She poisoned the well for all of us. A businessman in a tailored suit, Ibrahim Osman, owner of 3 restaurants. After her scandals, my business dropped 40%. People assume all Somali are like her. 20 years building trust, destroyed by one woman's greed. The testimonies continued, each one a dagger to Omar's crumbling defense. These weren't political opponents or paid witnesses. These were members of her own community. The people she claimed to represent standing up to denounce her betrayal. Kennedy produced more evidence. Surveillance logs showing Omar meeting repeatedly with Somali intelligence officers. Financial records showing suspicious transactions timed with these meetings. Even recordings of phone calls where she provided information about congressional deliberations that could benefit Somalia at America's expense. 17 meetings with Colonel Hassan Farah of Somali intelligence. Kennedy read from an FBI report. Each meeting preceded by cash deposits to accounts linked to your campaign. Each meeting followed by votes or actions beneficial to Somali government interests. This isn't representation, ma'am, it's espionage. The photographs of these meetings were particularly damning. Parking garages, secluded restaurants, even one in what appeared to be a hotel room. The body language suggested an intimacy that went beyond professional consultation. You know what really gets my goat? Kennedy asked, his voice taking on an edge of personal offense. It's not just the betrayal of America. It's the betrayal of people like Mr. Hassan here. Folks who came to this country with nothing but hope. Who worked hard, followed the rules, raised their kids to be Americans. You made them all suspects. You turned their American dream into a nightmare of suspicion and mistrust. He produced one final item from this folder. An email Omar had sent to a network of supporters. Kennedy read it aloud. We are building something beautiful. Brothers and sisters, an invisible nation within a nation. They give us their citizenship, their benefits, their protection. We give them nothing but contempt. Use your positions. Take what you can. Send it home. Our real home. Invisible nation within a nation. Kennedy repeated. That's not immigration. Ma'am, that's invasion. That's colonization. That's using America's generosity as a weapon against it. The folder closed with a sound like a cell door slamming. Espionage. Conspiracy to defraud the United States. Obstruction of justice. Operating an unregistered foreign intelligence operation. And we still got one more folder to go. Omar sat slumped in her chair. Her earlier fire completely extinguished. Her lawyer was writing furiously. Probably drafting resignation letters as much as legal strategies. Her supporters had largely abandoned her with only a few deers remaining. And even they looked more shocked than supportive. You know, Kennedy mused, reaching for the final folder. My grandpappy used to say, one bad apple spoils the bunch. Well, you didn't just spoil the bunch. Congresswoman, you poisoned the whole orchard. The Somali American community is going to spend years recovering from what you've done to their reputation. He hefted the final folder, which appeared thinner than the others, but somehow heavier in his hands. This last one's about your friends. The squad, the sisterhood, the revolution. Turns out you didn't just corrupt yourself. You tried to corrupt them, too. Some resisted, some didn't, but they all knew what you were. And that knowledge is going to cost them dearly. The final folder bore fewer documents than its predecessors. but Kennedy handled it with the care of someone defusing a bomb. Perhaps because this folder contained evidence that would send shock waves beyond just Omar, reaching into the heart of progressive politics and shattering illusions held by millions of young Americans who had seen the Squad as their political avatars. Last but not least, Kennedy began his voice carrying the weariness of someone who had seen too much corruption. Like they say at the funeral home, everybody looks peaceful at the end, but this particular end, well, it's about as peaceful as a hurricane in a trailer park. He extracted photographs first, the Squad in their glory days. Omar Ocasio-Cortez, Clave and Presley arms-linked fists raised the picture of progressive solidarity that had graced countless magazine covers and inspired a generation of activists. "Y'all look like the future," Kennedy observed. "Young, diverse, passionate. What you really were was a criminal enterprise dressed up in revolutionary rhetoric. Like putting a bow tie on a buzzard." The financial documents he produced next revealed a web of interconnected fundraising that violated numerous federal election laws. "Joint fundraising is legal," Kennedy explained, adopting his teaching tone. "Coordinated fundraising within limits is legal. But what y'all did, that's about as legal as a $3 bill." He displayed a chart showing the flow of money between various Squad-affiliated campaigns and political action committees. Shared donor lists sold between campaigns. That's illegal. Coordinated spending beyond federal limits. Illegal. Anand contributions hidden through shell organizations. Illegal. Y'all were like a bunch of raccoons in a garbage can making a mess and proud of it. But here's where it gets really interesting. Kennedy continued producing emails that had been obtained through what must have been an extensive investigation. "These are from your Squad meetings. Private gatherings where you planned your revolution. Except your revolution looked a lot like old-fashioned corruption with better social media." He read from the emails, his draw making the conspiratorial content even more jarring. "We need to maximize our fundraising potential. If we each create 3 shell companies, we can move money between them without FEC scrutiny. That's you, Congresswoman Omar, teaching your sisters in arms how to break the law." Another email. "The key is to make everything look grassroots. Small donations get attention. Large donations through intermediaries get results. That's financial structuring. Ma'am, that's money laundering. That's federal prison time." A young woman in the gallery stood suddenly, tears streaming down her face. "I worked for the Squad," she announced, her voice breaking. "I believed in you. I thought we were changing the world." Kennedy gestured for her to continue, recognizing the power of betrayed idealism. "Tell us what you know." "Young lady, we were told to create fake donor accounts," she said, her words coming in rushes between sobs. "Take big donations and break them into small ones. Make it look like grassroots support when it was really corporate money. BlackRock, Google, all the companies you claim to oppose. They were funding you through back channels. Thank you for your courage," Kennedy said gently. "I know this is hard. Believing in something and then finding out it was a lie, that's about as painful as stepping on a Lego in the dark." He returned to his documents, producing evidence of connections to major corporations that the Squad had publicly antagonized while privately accepting their money. BlackRock, the big bad wolf of capitalism. According to your speeches, also coincidentally the source of $2.3 million in dark money to Squad-affiliated PACs. Funny how that works. The recordings he played next were from what appeared to be a private Squad strategy meeting. The audio was clear enough to identify voices. "Clay, how much can we move without triggering reports?" "Omar, I'll teach you what I learned. The key is layers like an onion." Ocasio-Cortez, "I don't know about this." "Omar, you want to change the system? You need money. You want money. You need to be smart. Trust me, trust me," Kennedy repeated. "That's what the snake said to Eve. And we all know how that turned out." He produced evidence of specific violations: 12 shell companies created to move money between Squad campaigns. Each transaction carefully structured to avoid reporting requirements. Total amount moved illegally $7.8 million over 3 years. But it wasn't just about the money. Kennedy continued, his tone becoming more somber. It was about the betrayal. Y'all presented yourselves as the pure ones. The uncorrupted ones. The ones who would change Washington. Instead, you became everything you claimed to oppose. You were the swamp monsters wearing progressive masks. The final recording was the most damaging. It captured a conversation between all Squad members. Their voice is clearly identifiable. Unknown voice. What if we get caught? Omar, we won't. And if we do, we claim persecution, racism, sexism, Islamophobia. The media will defend us. Another voice. But it's wrong. Omar, wrong. You know what's wrong. Poverty, powerlessness. This is how we fix that. For ourselves first, then maybe for others. The hearing room had become a morgue. Silent, except for the quiet sobbing of disillusioned supporters. Even the reporters seemed stunned by the depth of cynicism revealed. You know what the saddest part is? Kennedy asked, closing the final folder with the finality of a book ending. It's not the money you stole. It's not the laws you broke. It's the hope you murdered. All those young people who believed in you. Who thought you were different. Who thought you would change things. You showed them that corruption isn't about party or age or identity. It's about character. And yours, ma'am, is as crooked as a dog's hind leg. He gathered all 5 folders together, stacking them neatly like a prosecutor preparing for closing arguments. Immigration fraud starting with a sham marriage to your brother. Campaign finance violations that turned your donors into unwitting accomplices. Foreign influence operations that made you a puppet of Qatar. Espionage activities that betrayed your oath to Somalia, and finally corrupting your colleagues and destroying a movement that millions believed in. Kennedy stood slowly, his full height making him tower over the seated Omar. In Louisiana, we have a saying, that dog won't hunt. Well, Congresswoman, none of your dogs will hunt. Not your race card, not your religion card, not your gender card. The only card you'll be playing is a prison ID card. The denim arrived with the inexorability of a Gulf hurricane preceded by an ominous calm that seemed to press against the hearing room's walls. Kennedy remained standing, his posture that of a man who had completed a distasteful but necessary task. Like a farmer who'd had to put down a rabid dog. The folders lay stacked before him, each one a testament to crimes that would echo through political history. Well, that's all she wrote, Kennedy said, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. As they say at the newspaper when the story is done. And Congresswoman, your story is done. Finished. Over. Kaput fine. The fat lady isn't just singing. She's doing encores. Omar suddenly erupted from her chair. Her earlier paralysis giving way to desperate action. She moved toward the exit. But her path was blocked by Capitol Police, who had been quietly positioning themselves during Kennedy's presentation. This is racism, she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. This is Islamophobia. This is sexism. This is persecution of a black Muslim woman. Kennedy watched her outburst with the detached interest of someone who had seen many criminals make their last desperate plays. Ma'am, he said, his voice cutting through her screams with its calmness. Down in Louisiana, we judge folks by their actions, not their accessories. You could be wearing a hijab, a habit, or a 10-gun hat. A thief is a thief. And a traitor is a traitor. The committee chairman, who had remained largely silent throughout the devastating presentation, finally spoke. Order. We will have order. His gavel banged repeatedly, the sound echoing off marble walls that had witnessed many dramatic moments. But few quite like this. I've seen possums with more integrity. Kennedy observed the folksy insult delivered with such matter-of-fact tone that it took a moment for its full impact to register. At least when a possum plays dead, it's for survival. You played dead to every oath you took. And it was just for money. The doors to the hearing room opened with military precision. And a team of U.S. Marshals entered in formation. Their movements were coordinated, professional. The culmination of what had clearly been extensive preparation. Leading them was a female marshal whose bearing suggested she had been specifically chosen for this arrest. Ilhan Abdullahi Omar, the lead marshal, announced, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. You are under arrest for immigration fraud, wire fraud in excess of $10 million, campaign finance violations, conspiracy to defraud the United States, operating as an unregistered foreign agent of multiple nations, espionage, money laundering, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. The litany of charges continued for nearly a minute, each one representing not just a violation of law, but a betrayal of the public trust. Omar's legs seemed to give out, and she would have fallen if not for her lawyer's supporting arm. You have the right to remain silent. The marshal continued, moving forward with handcuffs at the ready. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You can't do this. Omar screamed, finding her voice again. I have immunity. Congressional immunity. Diplomatic immunity. You can't arrest me for doing my job. Kennedy's response was delivered with the patience of a teacher correcting a particularly slow student. Congressional immunity doesn't cover treason. Ma'am, it doesn't cover espionage. And it certainly doesn't cover being as crooked as a barrel of snakes. The only immunity you're going to get is immunity from ever holding public office again. As the marshals moved to arrest her, Omar made one last desperate gambit. I have information, she shouted, about everyone. The whole Congress is corrupt. I can give you names, dates, amounts. Republicans too bigger fish than me. Now she wants to make a deal. Kennedy observed to no one in particular. That's like trying to unbake a cake. Some things once they're done can't be undone. And you, ma'am, are done like dinner. The scene that followed would be replayed endlessly on news channels and social media. Omar resisted arrest, not violently, but with the passive resistance of someone who couldn't accept that their story was ending. She went limp, forcing the marshals to essentially carry her all while screaming about persecution and injustice. You don't understand, she wailed as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Everyone does it. The whole system is corrupt. I just got caught. This is selective prosecution. A voice from the gallery interrupted her rant. It was another member of Congress. A progressive Democrat who had once been one of Omar's allies. No, Ilhan, not everyone does it. Some of us actually believe in serving our constituents. Some of us remember our oaths. You're not being persecuted. You're being held accountable for your crimes. The Somali American community members who had testified began singing softly at first. Then with growing strength. It was the American national anthem sung with the accent of immigrants. But with the passion of true patriots. The contrast with Omar's screaming created a powerful moment that would become one of the defining images of the day. You've killed the progressive movement. Omar shrieked at Kennedy as the marshals dragged her past his table. You've destroyed hope for millions. Young women who looked up to us immigrants who saw us as proof they could succeed. You've crushed their dreams. Kennedy's response was measured, but devastating. No, ma'am, you killed the progressive movement the moment you decided to steal from it. You destroyed hope when you chose corruption over service. You crushed dreams when you used idealism as cover for crime. I just documented it. Don't blame the doctor for finding the cancer. Blame the cancer for existing. As they reached the door, Omar twisted around for one last look at the hearing room. Her hijab had shifted. Her makeup was smeared from tears. And her designer suit was wrinkled from struggle. She looked nothing like the confident revolutionary who had entered the room hours earlier. This isn't over, she screamed to the cameras. My people will rise up. There will be protests. There will be justice. History will vindicate me. I'll be remembered as a martyr. History will remember you as a cautionary tale. Kennedy replied, his voice carrying despite its softness. A story parents tell their children about what happens when ambition eclipses integrity. When identity politics becomes a shield for criminality. When public service becomes private enrichment. You'll be remembered all right as an example of what not to do. And the marshals finally succeeded in removing Omar from the hearing room. Though her protests could be heard echoing down the marble corridors for several minutes. The silence that followed her departure was profound. As if everyone needed a moment to process what they had witnessed. Kennedy began gathering his folders, handling them with the same care he had shown throughout the hearing. As he did, he addressed the room one final time. His voice taking on the cadence of a preacher delivering a sermon. Folks, this ain't about where you're from or what you wear on your head. America is a country of immigrants built by people who came here seeking better lives. My own ancestors came from Ireland and Scotland looking for opportunity. They found it because they embraced American values. Not because they tried to exploit them. He looked directly at the Somali American community members who remained in the gallery. To y'all who came here the right way. Who work hard. Who raise your children to be good Americans. You have nothing to be ashamed of. One criminal doesn't define a community any more than one bad apple defines an orchard. Hold your heads high. You're as American as apple pie are in Louisiana. As American as crawfish etouffee. Turning to the cameras, knowing his words would reach millions, Kennedy continued, we welcome everyone who comes here legally and loves America. Who wants to build up, not tear down. Who wants to contribute, not just take. But if you come here to rob us blind, To serve foreign masters. To use our freedom against us. Well, we'll stop you dead than a doornail. He picked up the stack of folders. Their weight, both physical and metaphorical. You know what we say in Louisiana. Lemon rule. Let the good times roll. But for criminals, the only thing rolling is them to jail. And that's not corn pone wisdom. Folks, that's American justice. As Kennedy prepared to leave, reporters shouted questions, seeking the perfect quote for their stories. He paused at the door, considered for a moment, then delivered one final observation. You know, my grandmama used to say, you can't make chicken salad out of chicken. Well, you know what? Today we showed that you also can't make a patriot out of a traitor. No matter how many flags you wrap yourself in, the truth will out, as they say. And today it surely did. With that, he walked out of the hearing room humming softly to himself. Those close enough to hear recognized the tune Louisiana Saturday Night, a song about simple pleasures and honest living. Everything that had been absent from the sordid tale just concluded. In the aftermath, the political earthquake continued to generate aftershocks. 23 members of Congress would eventually be investigated based on connections revealed in Omar's files. The squad effectively disbanded its members, either facing charges or desperately distancing themselves from their former colleague. Progressive politics would take years to recover from the blow to its credibility. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on the young idealists who had believed in Omar and her message. They gathered outside the Capitol not to protest her arrest, but to process their disillusionment. Some wept, others stood in shocked silence. Many held signs they had brought to support her, now abandoned on the ground like fallen leaves. One young woman, perhaps 20 years old, was interviewed by a reporter. I believed in her, she said, tears streaming down her face. I thought she was different. I thought she would change things. How do we trust anyone now? An older Somali-American man overheard and approached her. It was Abdullahi Hassan who had testified during the hearing. He spoke gently with the wisdom of someone who had lived through many disillusionments. You trust, but you verify, he said. You judge people by their actions, not their words. You look for those who serve, not those who take. They exist. I've met many in my 30 years here. Don't let one criminal steal your faith in democracy. That's what she would want. Don't give her that final victory. Back in the now empty hearing room, a janitor began the process of cleaning up. He swept up discarded signs, collected abandoned programs, and restored order to the space where chaos had reigned. As he worked, he hummed his own tune. God bless America, a simple reaffirmation that despite the day's revelations, despite the corruption exposed, the system had worked, a criminal had been caught, justice had been served, and America, bruised, but not broken, would endure. The sun was setting over Washington as Ilhan Omar was processed into federal custody. Her designer suit was exchanged for an orange jumpsuit. Her carefully styled hijab was replaced with a prison-issued head covering. Her congressional pin was confiscated along with her other personal effects. The transformation from powerful legislator to federal inmate was complete. In his office, Senator Kennedy sat at his desk. The 5 folders now part of the official congressional record. His assistant brought him coffee strong and black, the way they made it in Louisiana. He sipped it slowly, thinking about the day's events. You know, he said to his assistant, I didn't enjoy that. Taking down someone, even someone corrupt, isn't fun, but it was necessary, like cleaning out an infected wound. Painful, but essential for healing. His assistant, a young man from Baton Rouge, who had worked for Kennedy since his treasurer days, nodded. You did what had to be done, Senator. The evidence was overwhelming. Evidence is just truth dressed up for court. Kennedy mused. The real tragedy is that she had so much potential. Smart, charismatic, passionate, could have done real good. Instead, he gestured at the folders. What happens now? The assistant asked. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, which creaked slightly under his weight. Now the lawyers take over. Trials, appeals, probably plea bargains. She'll likely get 25 to life, serve 15 with good behavior. The others caught in her web will get less. Some will testify against bigger fish. The swamp will get a little cleaner. At least for a while. And politically. That's the interesting part, Kennedy said, a slight smile playing at his lips. This could be a wake-up call. Voters might start demanding more transparency, more accountability, might start looking past the slogans and social media presence to see who candidates really are. Or he paused, took another sip of coffee. Or they'll forget in 6 months and elect the next smooth-talking grifter who tells them what they want to hear. Democracy is funny that way. It gives people exactly what they deserve. For better or worse. Outside, the lights of Washington began to twinkle in the gathering darkness. The city that had seen so many scandals, so many falls from grace, added another to its long history. But it would survive as it always had. Because for all its flaws, for all its corruption, the system had within it the seeds of its own redemption, the possibility of exposure, the promise of justice, and the hope that tomorrow's leaders might learn from today's failures. In a federal holding facility across town, Ilhan Omar sat on a narrow bunk, contemplating the ruins of her life. The career built on deception had collapsed in a single day. The fortune accumulated through fraud would be seized by the government. The influence purchased with foreign money had evaporated like morning dew. All that remained was the prospect of years behind bars and a legacy of betrayal. She had promised to fundamentally transform America. In a perverse way, she had succeeded, just not as intended. Her corruption had sparked a new awareness of foreign influence operations. Her crimes had led to enhanced scrutiny of campaign finances. Her betrayal had taught a generation the importance of vigilance in democracy. History would indeed remember her as Kennedy had predicted, not as a martyr or revolutionary, but as a reminder that in America, no one is above the law. That justice, though sometimes slow and often imperfect, eventually finds its mark. That the truth, no matter how carefully hidden, has a way of emerging into the light. The senator from Louisiana had been right about one thing. You can't polish a sneaker. You can't make chicken salad out of chicken, and you can't build a lasting legacy on a foundation of lies. The good times would roll again in American politics. But for Ilhan Omar, the only thing rolling was the dice of justice. And she had crapped out spectacularly. The house always wins in the end. And in America, the house is built on the rule of law. As night fell over the nation's capital, one chapter closed and another began. The work of democracy continued, messy and imperfect, but essential. And somewhere in Louisiana, an old senator's grandmother would have been proud her grandson had helped clean out the barn. Starting with the biggest pile, just as she had taught him, the reckoning was complete. Justice served with a side of cornpone wisdom had prevailed.